The first thing that attracted me to this was Jason Reitman. I love Jason's films. They all feel like they're relevant in some way to what is going on in society now. This is different for him. It's based on a true story and a real character. He had never done that before. I'd never done that before, not someone who's alive. But certainly working with him, all of his films end up being funny and fun and very interesting and very human. He doesn't like giving black and whites. He likes seeing the flaws in his characters. I think what I loved about this film is there is no hero and no villain. You see a political campaign in 1987 that feels very real and it also feels very human. You see the chaos, you see the mistakes, you see the flaws, and ultimately I think what it does is, rather than give you easy answers of should he or shouldn't he have been president, was the press going too far or not, it asks you questions as an audience about what is interesting and what is important. I was very nervous to play Gary. First of all, he was almost categorically believed to be the next president of the United States. So you're playing someone who could believably be the president of the United States. And my wife jokingly calls me Senator Jackman at times because I always ask waiters what their name is and things like that. But to believably play someone who probably would have been the next president is something. To play someone who's as enigmatic and difficult to nail down, and elusive was the one word everybody kept mentioning about him, that was a huge challenge. But I'm friends with Gary now. I got to know Gary. I read about Gary. I watched tape of Gary. I spent time in Gary's house, living with his family. I call him a friend. And I knew, or I hoped, that at some point he was going to sit down and watch the movie that portrayed the worst 3 weeks of his life. So it was a huge responsibility to me. And I wanted him to know that I took it very, very seriously. Prior to this campaign, politicians and press were friends. I mean, they spent probably more time with each other than they did with their own families. I mean, you're on a campaign for 18 months. You travel around from place to place, a small town to small town. You do your axe throwing thing during the day. You do a policy speech, whatever it is. And then at the end of the night, everyone's staying at the same hotel, and you go down to the bar in the hotel and you'll have a whiskey together and have a joke and a laugh, right? These are the people you spend months with. From this moment on, there is a separation. And those friendships are not a given anymore. There is a separation between the press and politicians, and that was a huge change that happened with this. I often think how incredible it must have been for the next president of the United States to find himself in an alleyway at 2 o'clock in the morning with 3 journalists from the Miami Herald, no one knowing what the hell to do. Like, no one's ever been in this position before. Everything was just jammed in very closely. And for many years, most people, and even to this day, people say to me, oh yeah, didn't Gary Hart ask the press to follow him around? Didn't they say, follow me around? But I think one of the things we clear up in this movie was that actually was not the case. You just had, under pressure, time constraints, you had this feeling that the press were onto a story that the public needed to know about, and they were pushing very, very hard to make that story come out. So you had all these situations that no one had ever dealt with before. And you call it a cat and mouse game, but in a way, it was uncharted territory. When I would tell people that I was doing the Gary Hart story, they go, monkey business, right? And what was the name? What was the name? Then didn't he say to follow her at Lake? So many people, I think, go into seeing this film. They might know something, may have heard of the name Donna Rice. They probably have an image in their head. She was the girl on the boat. And nothing is said about her at all for the first part of the film. And then in the second half of the film, you get such a strong, powerful portrait of a young woman with great intelligence, great ambitions, and you see that her life has been ostensibly stolen from her. And I think you have great empathy for the character. It's one thing I'm very proud of the movie, I think, in the way it handles all the female characters and the way it shines a light on the female stories. And it doesn't give you easy answers necessarily, but I think it really makes you think and even question your own assumptions at the beginning of the movie about who Donna Rice was. Donna was the first person that Jason showed the movie to out of all the people in the film, and I think that speaks to his how important it was to him as a filmmaker in the way he handled that story. Jason loves flawed characters. Teenage pregnant mother-to-be, a lobbyist for the smoking industry, a guy who fires people for a living. In every film, he loves the humanness of life. He's a very curious guy. And in this film, instead of just focusing on my character, Gary Hart, he really focuses on at least 12 stories. So you are viewing a political campaign, a turning point in history, and he sits back and allows you, as the viewer, to really focus on whoever you want to focus on. It's got an Altman-esque kind of quality. In times it feels like a 70s movie. It feels very realistic. There's a lot of overlapping dialogue. He used to change things up all the time. When I did all my press conferences in the film, I had no idea who was going to ask me questions or where they would come from. It was free-flowing and felt very realistic, and always juggling its point of view so that you as the audience, filmically as well as philosophically, get to decide what is important and what you want to follow.